Hi folks, in today's video we're diving into the latest from Paizo, the NPC Core for Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered. This sourcebook promises to be a game changer for game masters, including over 250 stat blocks for various NPCs, innovative mechanics, and tools to enrich your campaigns. So let's see if it holds up to the hype. So the NPC Core is designed to help streamline the game master's experience. It provides you with all of the mechanics for all of these different kinds of NPCs. It's all statted out, and there are also clear instructions on how to alter the NPCs, to change their ancestries, to buff them up or make them a little bit easier to handle, and it's all here in the book for you. I think this is going to be super useful for game masters who especially like to homebrew. Game masters who run modules may find this helpful, but this is definitely more for like you make it all. Definitely more for homebrew game masters. Because, say your party has found themselves arrested and you need stat blocks for a warden. Well, you just flip to the page that has the warden and it has all of the stats for that NPC. Or, for example, I need an acolyte. You can flip and find it. Now, these are all organized into kind of groups, and then there are specific examples of NPCs. So, for example, some of the groups of NPCs you have are artisans, couriers, devotees, criminals, engineers, explorer, healers, mercenaries, military, mystics, scholars, seafarers, and villains. Now, when you're first flipping through this book, you are going to notice that this is a very heavily mechanic-focused book. There's not a whole lot of lore, while a lot of the entries will have these little sidebars, and maybe a little bit of information about, like, what an assassin is. There's not going to be a lot of lore in this book, and you're not going to have like fully fleshed out NPCs with like their personality and backstory, but you will have all of the stats, which I think is something that game masters are probably more looking for, because you can take that kind of template NPC and then very easily apply the personality, apply the details that make it a full, complete character. But the difficulty of coming up with all of the mechanics is taking care of you with this book. At the beginning of the book, there are very clear rules for adjusting the difficulty level of the NPC. They kind of have the suggested level. But if you want to introduce one earlier on in your campaign, or want to level up an NPC to make it more difficult, there are clear instructions on how to do that. I'm not going to go into the details of how. For that, you need the book. I also like in this beginning section, they have a reference to and explanation of troop rules. It's very similar to a swarm, but something that applies to NPCs. And I should also note, I didn't note this earlier, that this is a book of humanoid NPCs. So the various humanoid ancestries, pretty much anything that your player characters can play, you can apply to these NPCs, but you're not going to find monsters in this book. That's what the monster manual is for. This is for just NPCs. So I really appreciate that there are these clear rules for troop, like groups or troop NPCs, from, okay, you have an actual troop of military NPCs to like an angry mob or just a group of NPCs. It's something that I know a lot of GMs have kind of done similar things and been like, okay, I'm going to kind of house rules how I run this, just so I'm not having to, roll for 20 different NPCs in one fight. So it's nice having that clear definition, especially for newer GMs, as well as experienced GMs, of like, hey, here's a clear way of doing this that feels very balanced. It doesn't feel like you're kind of making the troop a little too hard, but it's also not just throwing like way too much at your party. Now, there are some of the sections that have a little bit more of that like world building or additional mechanic. I really like that the artisans and guild section has some examples of like, if a map maker NPC interacts with the party, here are ways that this NPC could help or hinder the party. It's nice seeing that kind of like examples given with them, not only that individual NPC, but also this idea that they are connected to a guild. So a few of these entries do have a little bit more expansion beyond just the mechanics. There's also some like animal things in here for some NPCs that would have some animal companions, and some of the more societal NPCs, plus a few like military suggestions. A big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Marty. If you enjoy our videos and want to support us, make sure you're subscribed, and then head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. Okay, let's get back to this review. Following the NPC gallery is a chapter about ancestries. The NPC Core kind of presents all of the NPCs as human, it seems, as the baseline, and then to make them different ancestries, say you want a kobold assassin, it has clear mechanics for how to adapt the assassin entry into a kobold. And it does this for all of the different kind of humanoid NPCs that you would have in a Pathfinder game. Within the section, there are also tables for personalities, some ancestral cultural things, as well as some ancestral traits. So if you don't want to go through and kind of individualize, you can just kind of pick or roll off of the table, which I think makes customizing these NPCs so you don't just have like all human NPCs makes that a lot easier. And I think this is a book that would be very useful to have at the table for those moments when it's like, oh, the characters went and met an NPC I wasn't ready for. I can come up with something very quickly on the fly that is fleshed out, that has all the mechanics there without needing to like pause the game and go like sit down and stat out a whole NPC on my own. One of the standout things that I know Paizo has teased and a few other people have talked about is the relationship mechanics in this book. This is a actually small section of the book. It's like just a couple of pages, but it provides this really clear mechanic for tracking and advancing relationships, whether those relationships are practical, emotional, or romantic. And we all know what we're doing. And I like that this is here. It helps provide a little bit more guidance for game masters who maybe are wanting to, have a little bit more clear definitions of like where things are going. I think this is also could be very useful if you have reoccurring NPCs that aren't with the party a lot, but kind of like, oh, we saw this NPC in session 1, and now we've seen this NPC again in session 7 and had a little bit of interaction, and now again in session 12. Well, how has that relationship changed? This can help provide a little bit more clarity for game masters to track those relationships and changes within that, and then like, how does this NPC behave towards the party as well as individual PCs. And it's everything from, a trusted confidant, somebody who's very close friends, to like arch rival. You can go different directions on that scale. Also, in this same chapter is some rules for NPC advancement. Now, these aren't like, here's the, XP that you need to keep track of for your NPCs, but it's more some guidelines for keeping in mind, like, yes, the NPCs should probably also advance along with the player characters. It's probably going to be a little bit slower, and it might be more event-based. You probably aren't going to be tracking XP for all of your NPCs, but it provides some guidance there. And I also like that it has some examples of here are some special perks an NPC may have because of a event that kind of helped advance them. That's a cool idea, and I think also provides, some examples that you can directly use or use as inspiration to create your own. The artwork in the book is really great. There are all sorts of depictions of all of these various NPCs that you can use to show your players, use for inspiration, and just nice things to look at. Overall, I think the NPC Core is a great addition to any game master's collection, especially if you are a homebrew game master. Now, it is not a necessity. I don't think you absolutely need to have this the way that, like, you need the game master's rulebook. You really kind of need the monster manual. You could sit down and stat out and create all of these NPC characters on your own. But I do think that this provides a shortcut that allows you to focus your prep time on other areas, on story, on creating the background and personality and all the details of your individual NPC, rather than needing to spend a lot of time just creating the stats that may or may not get used. Like, I like to have, especially major NPCs, have their stats available. But there have been times where I've had an NPC that came up last minute and I didn't have stats for it. And it would have been very useful to have something like this where I could just pull this out, find an NPC that is like, oh yeah, this is definitely like a baker NPC or a militia NPC, or find something that's close enough that the stats make sense, and then actually have something to roll off of rather than just trying to kind of like come up with it on the fly, or, use an NPC and need to like that I've already created and make a whole bunch of changes. And then keep track of those changes. I think this would be very useful for those kinds of situations, because let's be honest, our players will go off in different directions. Sometimes they want to interact with the NPCs that you created, and that's great. Sometimes the best, and honestly, let's be honest, most of the time, the favorite NPCs of your players end up being those ones that come up on the fly and just become party favorites. And so having a resource that you can focus on the personality elements and not necessarily worry about the mechanics can be so useful for those moments when the party's like, yeah, let's go talk to this random kobold that you weren't expecting. You can create them very quickly. I also think that this book can be a really great inspiration for game masters, because it is going to give you all of these different kinds of NPCs. So if you are a game master who you find I tend to have kind of the same blanket slate of NPCs in my games, flipping through this, you might come up with some new ideas for people that your players can meet within the game. Perhaps it's fleshing out a part of a city that you never really thought about. I didn't really think about the criminal element, or I didn't think about the bakers, and maybe there could be a storyline with the Bakers Guild. As well as they do have some villains in here. So if you are looking for some inspiration for that, you can draw from here. And I will say the villain section has a little bit more not quite lore, but some of that inspiration in it. So have you picked up the NPC Core, or are you considering it? I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. And I also want to know, what is your favorite NPC that you have ever created? Let's share some of them. My personal one was this little tooth fairy that I made. They were kind of Guillermo del Toro inspired tooth fairies that stole people's teeth and shoved them into their own mouths. And the party befriended one who was kind of the runt of the tooth fairy swarm, and kind of adapted, brought him into the party for a couple of sessions. And that was fun, getting to figure out the personality and stat out that individual tooth fairy and give him some little bonuses since he did some cool things. So what is your favorite NPC that you have created, whether planned out or created on the fly? Let's chat more in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!